I thought we'd just jump right into what contests you guys have been participating in over the last couple of weeks. I presume probably the NAQP, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Do the East Coast guys do NAQP, Randy? Is that a thing?
Yes, some of them do. I normally would, but I've been out of town the last 2 weekends, so I haven't done anything this year yet.
So Chris, tell me about your NAQP experience.
Yeah. So I wasn't going to do NAQPCW. As Randy may have mentioned, some of my antennas didn't survive the winter time. So I didn't really have the energy to put them back up in time for the contest. So I was going to skip NAQPCW, maybe do phones for the first time seriously. But N9RV messaged me about a week before the contest and said, "Hey, I can't do it serious. Do you want to come on by?" I said, "Sure." So spare you the details, but it was minus 42 degrees. That's Fahrenheit, also similar in Celsius. And I drove over there at 5 a.m. on the day of the contest, and we got there, and the antenna switching was frozen up. Pat heroically got things going well enough to where I could operate a little bit. We had no band switching. It was just direct connected, and interstation interference was kind of funky, but he got the stubs going. And then the power went out. So, well, it was 40 below, so we decided to get the power going so it could be warm in the house. So we got the power going, got the generator going. About a half hour into the contest, it was basically a non-competitive effort, and I was going to drive home. Pat said, "Well, why don't you sit down and make a few cues anyway while you're here?" I said, "Yeah, might as well." And about 2 or 3 hours later, I stood up, and I'm like, "Oh, that was pretty good. The bands are great." And we decided that I could probably cobble something together for some band switching. I couldn't move mults, wasn't real, competitive there, but maybe the 2 hours before the end of the contest, the switching came back, and it was great. We'll see how the log checking is. Should have won the contest, should have got a new record. It was lots of bolts on. So don't have the QSO record, missed that by about 100, but for a contest it almost wasn't. It worked out pretty well.
So what's the thing that got you to keep going? Was it because you'd already driven a bunch of miles to get there, or just because you're an addict?
Not really the addict thing. The bands were really good, and Pat has huge antennas, so the rate was great, and he seemed like things were going well. We were posting to the scoreboard, but the internet and cell phone went out, so I couldn't watch it, and I wasn't anyway. I knew I was doing good on cues, so maybe halfway through it was like, "Ooh, this might be a pretty big effort." And then it was like, "Oh, I'm committed this far, I might as well keep going."
So it sounded though like you did think about quitting for a while, or initially you were just going to pack it in.
Well, yeah, we were getting the generator going, and talking between us was like, "Well, we can't be competitive now. That was it. We can't start the contest late." And then it was like, "Well, maybe you can." So yeah, it was cool.
Awesome. Well, it was a pretty amazing score considering that you lost a bunch of time at the beginning, and those are usually the best hours.
Chris, for those people that don't know the NAQP and what makes that unique, just give us a quick rundown of what makes the NAQP different than the other contests.
Yeah, so the NAQP is my favorite contest by far. Low power, 100 watts only, or QRP if you want. So no amplifiers. Last year I had a 320 hour with this spider beam at 30 feet and 100 watts. I mean, you can't do that in any other contest. It's 12 hours, operate 10. So it's pretty intense, but a guy with a tri-bander and some wires can make 1,000 Qs the whole time. It's great. You don't have big wide signals. Guys aren't blasting you with their amps. Everyone's on a level playing field. It's great.
Let's talk about the fact that in NAQP, it's a 100-watt contest. Every time I do it, it always feels like just the bands are more sane, for lack of a better word. You just don't have these monster signals. You don't have people that are wide. You don't have some of the aggression because everybody feels like they're kind of on equal footing. So it just seems more civilized.
Yeah, totally. At least on CW. On phone, it's difficult on the low bands, but it's just a different beast. It's great. If you haven't done it, you should.
With low power, you can't really overpower propagation either. You kind of have to ride the wave. Whatever band's open, that's where you have to be. So you have to pay a lot more attention.
So, Randy, you weren't able to participate in this particular contest, I take it?
I was not. I've had a couple of trips over weekends in a row here, so had to miss out. Missed out on the RIDI Roundup, too. That would have been another contest that I would have done. It would be a dry January, except for the fact that I've been participating in this worldwide award thing using the call sign N1W, where it's a month-long operation organized by the guys, some guys in Italy, where essentially a big scavenger hunt for everybody in the world to chase the 30 or so WWA stations. So it's been kind of fun to be the subject of pileups all month.
I was wondering what that was.
And, we don't often talk about practice, but when you get a chance to be in a place where you've got people calling you, it's always a chance to practice. What's a good way to try to handle the pileup? What's a good way to try to unwind things? What's a good way to see if I can get the guy that I actually want to come back to me? A lot of people tend to think, oh, well, I'll just get on in the contest and work some guys and I'll be instantly good. And the reason the good guys are good is because they spend a lot of time just making QSOs and learning what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I just got back from the Bahamas and I was operating as stroke Charlie 6 Alpha. And I found that to be true, Randy. I was able to get on for an hour, 2 hours, at the most 2.5 hours at a time. And it really helped to get into a routine. One of the things that I was really working on was, it was certainly easy to work the American stations, but then there'd be these very faint 5x1 callers that there are other countries that I wanted to get, and to try to get those out of the pile up while everybody else was screaming over them was fun, but it also took a lot of effort.
Yeah, I think if you travel around the world, you notice that people in America, if you tell them to get in line, they get in line. And there are other parts of the world where a line is just a suggestion. And pileups are kind of the same way. You sometimes end up, it's very not perfect. Pileup is when where one guy calls every time. Nice and in the clear, you get the whole call sign. The worst kind of pileups are the ones where you have a lot of people calling and nobody wants to accept the fact that somebody else, that the partial call wasn't them. So they keep calling. And of course, you've got this partial, you can hear the guy, hear him fine, but people keep calling over him. And so everything takes twice or three times as long as it should have, just because of people trying to be impatient.
Well, and it's always impressive that when people do finally quiet down, then all of a sudden the guy's a 5'9".
Yeah, well, that's what's amazing. It's just this snarling mess, and then you finally get the one guy, and he's perfectly copyable. It's like, what? But that's the funny thing about sideband, especially, is just the way everything kind of mushes together. But even on CW, when everybody's calling on the same frequency, kind of the same thing. You just can't pull anything out. You just end up with a modulated tone.
Ugh, that's the worst.
And this is one of the things that Chris and also N6MJ, when they're doing these 2B SIQ efforts where they're CQing on two bands, I just don't see how they get a call sign every time. To me, that's the amazing element of what they're doing.
Well, I mean, you talk about practicing. That's something you have to practice daily leading up to a contest for sure. And speaking of guys being weak, I did a presentation a couple weeks ago about kind of, high level operating, like for the average guy. One of the points I made was, I don't care how loud you think you are not loud enough to just walk all over the pileup, period. I don't care what you think you have for an antenna, you're not loud enough. And if everybody goes into a pileup with that mentality, everyone will make more QSOs.
Yeah, you really notice it's been fun when you have a big pileup on CW. You've got all these people right on frequency because they clicked on the spot or whatever. And then there'll be these guys off to each edge. And they're just so easy to copy because they're different. They're kind of by themselves a little bit. They're often not the loudest guys. That's what's amazing is you want to get through a pileup. You don't have to be the loudest guy. Just be off frequency a little bit, especially on CW. It's a little harder on phone because then it's more about trying to find the space.
What's the trick on phone for an operator to work through a pileup? I'm talking about me as the caller.
Yeah, you know what I've noticed is the better your audio is, the cleaner it is, no distortion. it just cuts right through on sideband. The more audio processing that you put in it, especially with some of the accents, it just gets harder and harder to understand. And when you have several people calling and they all kind of mush together because of the too much processing, then the one guy who's got a nice, crisp, clean signal, it just cuts through.
I've got to say, though, I found myself wanting to work the overprocessed audio just to get them out of the way. I was trying to ignore a particular guy, and he
there
just
are
was,
some
he was
countries who I think
relentless.
operate on the thing where it's like, we're going to keep calling until you work us because it's to your benefit.
Absolutely. And when I finally worked this one particular guy, it was like great. It was like clear sailing after that.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to do that. And you can't win. It becomes counterproductive if you try to put this guy in the penalty box and say, well, I'm going to ignore him because he just covers up so many people. You're working against yourself. So it's better just to shovel them on through.